Did your grandparents also used to tell you that in the old days everything was so much cheaper? Now the world is just so expensive. Maybe you didn't think much of it, but you should, because your grandparents were right. The world is getting more expensive. To understand why this matters and why exactly this is such a big deal for you, me, and all of us, you urgently need to understand the basics of a cute little thing called inflation. Because the effect this has on your life are massive. If you understand inflation at its core, you can implement necessary measures to protect yourself. And this will save you literally thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. If you, on the other hand, do not understand it, you instead just ignore it, it will haunt you later. Where does inflation currently stand and what exactly is it? If you have been following the news over the last months, a big panic seemed to have been going around. Inflation rates are increasing rapidly at the moment, and this is a problem for you. Rising inflation is triggering anxiety around the world as a surge in demand following the easing of COVID-19 lockdowns has been confronted by supply bottlenecks. For instance, the annual inflation rate in the US edged up to a 13-year high of 5.4% in September 2021. Main upward pressure came from cost of shelter as well as food. In Germany, where I'm from, the inflation rate reached around 4.5% in October 2021. An inflation rate this high was last measured in December 1993, almost 30 years ago. So what does inflation actually mean? Inflation is the decline of purchasing power of a given currency over time. The rise in general level of prices means that any unit of currency buys you less than it did in prior periods. Prices literally inflate. There are many different reasons for and types of inflation. A demand-pull inflation happens when the demand for certain goods and services is greater than the economy's ability to meet those demands. In a cost-pull inflation, on the other hand, prices are increased due to higher production costs. The inflation rate is based upon the Consumer Price Index, short CPI. In the US, the CPI is produced by the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. It is a measure of the average change over time in the prices paid by urban customers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. The basket of goods is divided in 8 major groups. It contains basic goods and services in the areas of food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, medical care, recreation, education and communication, and other goods and services. As you might have guessed, the exact goods can only ever be a mere sample of all the goods and services out there. This may lead to some serious blind spots, as you quite likely do not buy the exact same products that are in this basket. Maybe you don't even drink, for instance, coffee or milk. There are some further problems, one of which is that the real effect of substitution is not accounted for. Let's be honest, the reality is that when goods become increasingly more expensive, you might likely switch to an alternative. The CPI seems to assume that you, as a customer, would buy the same amount of the same, more expensive food, which, as we established, is quite likely not the actual case. But what impact do these inflation rates that everybody's always referring to actually mean? If we take the 5.4% inflation rate of September 2021 in the United States, and to make it a bit simpler, pretend the annual inflation rate would be 5%, then this would mean that if you had $100 in your hand in the beginning of 2021, 12 months later, your $100 would still be $100, but they would be worth only $95. What you have here, my dear friend, is the decline of purchasing power. Now, the tricky part is that you actually still have $100 in your hand, but you cannot do as much with it as before. You can only buy with those $100 what you could buy with $95 1 year ago. However, it must be noted that inflation rates are not always constant, as they are not fixed every month or year. The reality looks far more volatile. It rather looks like this. On this chart, you can see the annual inflation by year for the United States, comparing the December CPI to the December CPI of the year before. On the left side, you have the annual inflation in percent, and down below you see the years, starting from 1957 all the way to 2020. As you can see, the annual inflation rates in the US in that particular period were as high as 13.29% in 1979 and as low as around -2% in 2009. The Federal Reserve in the US targets a 2% annual inflation rate, believing slow and steady price increases help keep businesses profitable. If we remember your $100 you just had and assume an inflation rate of only 2%, $100 would lose $2 in value in the first year and be worth only $98 1 year later. which is still a loss in purchasing power. But wait, you might think, these small inflation rates are not too bad, are they? Yeah, well, but they are, as over time it really adds up. If you had $1,000 in 2001 and wanted to have the same purchasing power today in 2021, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, all of a sudden you would need a whopping $1,538.40. That is an increase of $538.40 over 20 years, just to have the same purchasing power. And if you increase the time frame even more to 30 years, the additional amount needed doubles. 30 years later, you would need $2,000. One final note. It is very important to understand that prices do not rise or fall in all areas of life at the same time and rate. While in Germany, for instance, between September 2020 and September 2021, prices of goods in total increased by 6.1%, which is already a lot. There was, however, a substantial increase for heating oil with 76.5% and for motor fuels with 28.4% compared with a year earlier. Now, if you want to know more about the real-life effects of inflation on your savings, be sure to check out the next videos. If you got something out of today's video, please leave a like, comment and hit the subscribe button. This really helps especially smaller channels like mine to gain some traction. And if you think someone you know should see this video, please share it with them. Thank you.